So, Mark's from DemystData, and my understanding is Demyst is all about social data for financial organisations.
Great.
Mark Hookey.
16th introduction. Evening everyone. I'm the founder of DemystData, so we aggregate online footprint and a range of other things, and we work with financial service providers. We want to talk today about who we are briefly, but more interestingly, let's have a crack as a group at defining big data, because everyone else seems to be having a go, so why not? My personal background is in the overlap of technology and data aggregation, originally with a price optimization in an insurance business, which we sold into a US data business, ChoicePoint, which was then part of LexisNexis. So I spent most of my career in the big data space for the last 15 or so years before big data was really around. About 2.5 years ago, founded DemystData. Very briefly, we aggregate an online footprint and leverage that for a range of outcomes for retail financial service providers. So, for example, for a marketing group within a retail bank or an online lender, we might help them decide how to prioritize leads based on whether someone is real from their online footprint. How many social networks are they on? What social graph do they have? Largely public data and largely stuff around onboarding of new customers that banks have never seen before. Think a 20-minute Google search about somebody, but scaled to very large data sets. We're very proud users of MongoDB, so we thank you. All of our backend is run on MongoDB, and we're taking that and a range of other components to build our platform to build out better customer profile. We do that from external data on the left-hand side, as well as internal data within the firewall of big banks. We add a layer of analytics on top, and then we deploy that into decisions. Working with a range of global banks, talking to about 20 of them, working with 3 actively, about 15 other online lenders, 200 or so other conversation/users/clients. Backed by an NGO called Axion International. We're based out of Hong Kong, so I'm personally on Hong Kong time right now, so if I don't make any sense, please let me know. I arrived yesterday. Testing data everywhere from Uganda and Kenya to the US, UK, and developed markets. We're taking this view that there's this boom of data out there, everyone's talking about it, and a lot of it's online, but in countries like Uganda and Kenya, there's pretty primitive credit bureaus, so to the extent we can attach insight to the online data that banks can leverage, we can help facilitate the distribution of credit in a positive way. So let's talk about big data, which just for fun, some recent examples of things that we've actually heard at major global banks and major lenders of how people think about big data when you talk about big data. There seems to be this catch-all phrase of anything and everything associated with something I didn't quite think about yet. Some people think of it as we're very serious about big data. We're installing a Hadoop cluster everywhere. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to solve all our problems, you know. And this is seriously senior people at major banks. We're installing a Hadoop. We're proud. Yeah, that's not really going to solve your problem because, as you mentioned earlier, it's not just about throwing technology around. It's about what you actually do with it and how you actually deploy insights. You know, analytics is not just about counting the number of likes, and especially from my background in risk modeling and various other aspects of the insurance process, there is extremely sophisticated analytics that takes advantage of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of attributes about a customer to make a decision in the insurance underwriting process. By contrast, you know, aggregating something, albeit extremely fast and massively scalable, is not necessarily big data in our particular viewpoint. There's all sorts of stuff in capital markets around big data sentiment. Let's buy Microsoft because people are saying good stuff about it. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but it's just a little bit too specific. High frequency trading as well. Buying a stock because of micro market movements. Some really interesting stuff going on there from a technology perspective. Making sense of unstructured data, call logs and other textual data. That's often framed in the big data frame. Finding out who your friends are to sell you some credit cards, walking down the street, getting sold some credit cards. I know some banks that are doing that. Dealing with the volume of data. It's not just about size, but it's about what you do with it. Sharing data internally, making things refresh faster. These things are all good things, but people seem to talk about extremely specific use cases. So before I jump ahead, any other examples of very specific use cases that people have heard with respect to the definition of big data? Okay, I'll come back to that. So my view is that it hasn't actually, in terms of the structure of the analytical process, it hasn't actually changed that much. It's been around for 50 years, for as long as people have been dealing with small data. There's been an analytical process which involves hardware to store things on, a process of starting with some data, enriching it, cleaning it, doing ad hoc analytics, doing some sort of systematic data modeling, whether that's a person or a machine is sort of an independent question, doing it at real time, simulating what's going to happen under a different set of business circumstances, then optimizing around that, and then deploying that into a decision. Then there's a process of tracking and learning. We took a bunch of historical outcomes, we modeled them, we fit statistical models to predict the future, we built an optimization algorithm that decides what's going to happen under an alternate universe, and then we deployed insight around that. So that's been around for a long time. It's just getting better and better, and it's getting better in a way that's becoming more disintermediated. It used to be that you had to buy this entire stack from a major technology company or a major consulting firm. But there's things happening at all layers here that are really disrupting the marketplace. And we're coming at this from specifically the financial services lens. So that's the only customers we have. So, hardware. There's hardware as a service. We were recently announced as a finalist in an Amazon startup challenge around big data. I used to work at LexisNexis, one of the greatest data companies on the planet, and one of their big selling points was we've got data warehouses with guys with machine guns and extremely strong security protocols and scalability that matches any prospective client. Nowadays, we as a 7-person startup based out of Hong Kong can spin up capacity with products like MongoDB that is petabyte and exabyte scale. You couldn't have even dreamt of that 5 years ago, and that's actually been enabled by a lot of these hardware platforms. There's more customer interactions online rather than offline, so that's creating much deeper, raw customer starting point data. Just to start with, what are we going to model around? Who are our customers? Enrichment of data, and this is the core of what our business does. The availability of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of attributes about who somebody is, whether they're a small business or a person or a stock or any other entity, that's exploded. And that's been made available by a whole range of things, things like web services and other platforms that are democratizing the access to data. That didn't exist 10 years ago. 10 years ago it was all about proprietary, contributory databases that had to be done through a very slow process. The software has evolved in a big way, and in a highly simplistic way. Part of this is about being able to deal with data that is bigger than the memory of the machine that you're dealing with, which has enabled all sorts of stuff. On the data modeling piece, this is another piece we spent a lot of time in. Building a statistical model that's based on very structured, clean relational databases is extremely different to building a database that's based on very fragmented sentiment-style data sets which have hundreds of thousands and millions of columns of attributes about an entity. So there are some non-parametric techniques that are getting stronger and stronger that, I don't know the appetite to talk about that, but that are really coming to maturity. They've been around for a long time, but until very recently, people were still largely in the real world using pretty simple logistic GLMs and other multivariate models that we learn in business school and so on. But nowadays, it's getting to the point where people want to do more advanced things that take into account the interaction effects of different data features when making a decision. And that's been driven by the availability of the raw data as a starting point. The online engagement models, whether we're talking about SMSs to a mobile phone or web pages, online banks, online lenders, the ability to customize the experience around every unique customer means that even with a given quantity of information, you can exploit it more. You can take better advantage of the information. So it used to be that you'd walk into a bank branch and they'd give you the best experience they could, but nowadays banks can come at this market and say, well, we actually do know with a certain level of precision, and they're just getting started, what this customer wants, when they want it, whether they're a good customer, and how to interact with them on a one-by-one basis. So that's increased the potential. And better real-time decisions. This has been driven in part by the competition from niche providers. One of the sort of quirks that we're finding in the marketplace here is that niche players are coming in and capturing segments of the market that's causing some substantial disruption. We think it's related to the content, the availability of open source techniques in big data. Essentially, that's leaving the banks exposed because they don't have as much of a barrier to entry as they used to. So niche providers can come in, whether it's an online personal financial management tool or an online lender or a savings-only bank or some other pure provider, and they can exploit more data about a customer than the banks are, and they can cherry-pick the best subset of risk. So in the telematics domain, I used to do a lot of work in this space where that creates a platform for the guys that get it right to adversely select the best customers and adversely select against their competitors, to leave the worst customers with the competitors. And that's starting to happen in financial services, and that's been enabled by big data. So what is this? I mean, it's pretty classic first-year strategic theory, which is a vertical disintegration. So it started to the point where there was this boom of data and it was extremely messy, and you needed highly specialized, expensive technology players and consulting firms to make any sense of it and execute. But nowadays, you can cherry-pick the elements of this value chain that really you need to solve. You don't have to get it all from one provider. So what that means is people starting out in new businesses that want to attack one component of this have a good chance of doing so if they're sufficiently focused. So we don't think the sequence of activities has changed materially, but the ability to do it in a focused way around each of the components has created a bit of a sea change of what can be done in financial services. As mentioned earlier, one of the other things that this is leading to is adjacent participants starting to get more serious, whether it's Facebook doing payments or telcos doing banking. I agree with you, I don't know why they haven't started O2 Bank. It's only a matter of time. So it's left what used to be a very healthy, defensible banking position in a rather weak position, because new players can come in and do quite well. And we think there's opportunities. So we're spending our time aggregating online data. That's what we're good at. And there's opportunities all through the value chain, whether it's building a niche database platform on the back end, or whether it's building a new data set in the middleware, building a new modeling technique at the front end, or deploying and taking advantage of enormous amounts of data more effectively. So whether you're going to be a consultant or a software engineer, there's opportunities. So I want to stop there. Any comments, discussions? Happy to go into more detail on any aspect of this.
Cool. Can we take any questions?
Relating to that slide you just went back through then, which sort of gave an idea of the way you work. Sorry, the one before, the very first one you had.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, when you started out, what do you think you did best there? Because you do a lot of different things there. Were you the best at sort of using the APIs to Facebook and whatever else, or were you the best at getting a relationship with a bank that allowed you to get access to that internal data, or were you the best at putting together analytics, yourself, that impressed? Just from a sort of startup point of view, how did you progress along that line?
Yeah, I'll tell a story like Hollywood likes to tell it, which is I'll start at the end and then I'll work backwards. I think that was a quote from the movie at some point. Currently, we're probably the best at this stuff, which is really making sense of this in a way that's compliant and painless and easy to use. So we're starting to get a bit of a reputation as being good at this stuff. When we started, we actually, from a startup perspective, went through all of the usual trials and tribulations of failed business models. So we didn't know what we were best at back then. We tried completely different models. We actually started as a consumer-facing platform where customers were going to self-report information like utility bills and telco bills to us, and then we were going to sell loans to them on behalf of the banks. So it just so happened that through that exploration process, we recognized that there was this under-leveraged online footprint. Even reasonably simple stuff like, are you a real person? Do you have a job? Not creepy stuff like, where were you drinking last night? Even the simple stuff was just not even leveraged in a deep way. So we sort of discovered that by chance and got pretty good at that.
Are you concerned at all that people might create fake LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook profiles in order to kind of trick out your system?
Yeah, and similarly, the credit bureaus are concerned that people create fake credit reports.
Are you aware of that actually happening?
Yeah, look, it depends on the regulatory. So we work in about 15 different countries, so what you can and can't do, it varies a lot by country. And what people see and don't see changes a lot by country. We're handling that issue by creating a breadth rather than a depth of data. We have about 80 different data sources right now, and our value is not tied to any one of them. So we look at a fragmented view of the world, and then we merge it together, and to the extent people can gain that, it creates a lot more effort than other methods to gain a financial service provider. It's certainly something that comes up in customer discussions a lot, and something to be careful of. I mean, similarly, people at the credit bureaus are concerned that you might go from one credit card with an 80% utilization to 2 credit cards with a 40% utilization, which will actually affect your credit score. Has no material impact on you, but people's ability to think through the entire sequence of events through that complicated black box that is a credit decision, it's not that they're not technically capable of it, but it's such an opaque process that people tend not to. Identity verification is much more blunt than that. It's much more about actually stealing a real customer that has a real LinkedIn profile and so on. Similarly, we find that people care a lot about their online profile. So yes, some people could possibly fake it, but it's hard to fake a realistic looking profile. And the motivation to do so is pretty hard as well. We do a lot of stuff in SME lending, right? So if I wanted to fake Joe's Pizza Shop down the road on Foursquare, fake a profile of Joe's Pizza Shop, and how could I possibly fake that somebody checked in 3 years ago on Foursquare? That's an independent platform, that's Foursquare. That's managed in MongoDB and was controlled by a company that you trust, which is Foursquare. So just as one small example, you can't actually game some of these things because there's a time issue. That's right. So look, data's not a perfect science. It's all about probabilities and predictions. So people tend to use our stuff for probabilistic stuff, which is what is the likelihood that they're a good customer, or what is the likelihood that we can cross-sell the product and so on.
Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.